This is Chris McKaylee, and I wanted to explain how to read the daily journals of the Senate and the Assembly in the California Legislature. Relatively straightforward. What's the purpose of the daily journal? It is actually the only required document pursuant to the Constitution, must keep a journal of its activities. And they're both titled Senate and Assembly Daily Journal. Of course, with the 2-year legislative session, which legislative date. In the assembly, they use two types of descriptions, the session day and the calendar day. And then, of course, where it is, and right top, uh, prominently listed, this is Thursday, September 14th, 2023, the last day of the legislative session. In the Senate, you can see it right here after the in Senate, Senate Chamber, Sacramento, Thursday, September 14th. And what is it? It is a compilation of the proceedings. Now, this is not a verbatim transcript like the congressional record or in some states. Instead, it's a basic information. So again, this is the way the Assembly Journal looks. The Senate one gets right into it immediately. And so if you open up after, you can see quorum call and the actual vote to establish. It says all 40 were there and their names, the quorum is present. And then they go through the prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance, and then motions and resolutions. What else do they have? Reports of committees. So the standing committee on rules. The committee on rules has examined these 4 bills and said the reports are correctly engrossed by the chair. It'll list the introduced bills, for example. On this next page, it lists measures that were withdrawn and re-referred to committee. And then, of course, you get into the consideration of the daily file. This is the second reading file where they're going to read those. They might have had some motions and resolutions, and then they get into it. And now, look, they don't have a transcript. Instead, they say, that bill was taken up here, Assembly Bill 1065. It's an act to amend Section 281 of the Public Utilities Code relating to communications. Bill read third time and presented by Senator Dodd. So obviously, uh, Senator Dodd was the author. I'm sorry, in this case, he took up an AB, so he's the floor manager. And then it just lists the roll was called and the bill was passed, and it lists the roll call vote. So it doesn't list, for example, who spoke in support, who spoke in opposition, or obviously what was actually said. And then, so it passed 31-6, and the bill was ordered transmitted back to the assembly because possibly amendments, for example. And then you might have some other things here in between consideration. They had privileges of the floor, special introductions. The presiding officer introduced former President Pro Tem of the Senate, the Honorable Darrell Steinberg, on behalf of Senator Atkins. He's the mayor of Sacramento currently, and it was to recognize him in his visit to the California State Senate. And so that's what's listed, for example, in the Senate Daily Journal. Again, after the first page of the Assembly one, we have the same sort of information, right? Assembly Chamber, Sacramento, Thursday, September 14th. The Assembly met at 1 p.m. Who was presiding? Stephanie Wynn, Assistant Speaker Pro Tem, Chief Clerk Sue Parker at the desk, Reading Clerk David Bowman reading. Then they took the roll call to establish the quorum. Assembly Member Hart moved a quorum call of the Assembly, and eventually everyone answered. All 80 were there. Then they had their prayer, Pledge of Allegiance, maybe some motions or privileges of the floor. They moved a series of bills to the inactive file. They re-referred a number of bills to other committees. The journal will list communications. So this one is to Sue Parker by Speaker Rivas, from Speaker Rivas, telling Ms. Parker, please be advised that I have appointed Assemblymember Timothy Grayson to replace Assemblymember Ash Kalra on the Assembly Housing and Community Development Committee for today's hearing only. Those communications from the governor, from the Assembly, or from the Senate are listed in the daily journals. And then look, we got into bills. Consideration of the daily file, third reading. They took up Senate bills. And again, just like the Senate, it lists the bill and it has the title, which includes the act to amend section 6309 of the Family Code, along with the relating clause relating to domestic violence. Bill presented by Assemblymember Pappen because she's the floor manager of that bill. Read third time and passed by the following vote, 61-0. Note it doesn't list who spoke in support, who spoke in opposition, or what they actually said. And it goes on to list other bills in just that same manner. So again, the daily files for the Assembly and the Senate both are basically a listing of the proceedings that took place with the basic detail. It's not a verbatim transcript or anything, again, like you find in the congressional record for the U.S. House and U.S. Senate.